I was so distraught. It had gotten to such a bad space, to such a bad point, that one day I walked out and I did not come back. I didn't give notice. I didn't officially quit. I just didn't return. What am I talking about? I'm talking about my 12th year of teaching. It was so bad. I could not stand it. I could not even fathom the thought of going back to that space. So one day I walked out and I didn't go back, at least not for a couple of months. Then I realized what I had done and I tried to make things a little bit better. And I tried to just finish off the year and manage things so that I could not leave anybody in a lurch. But it was really a devastating moment. It was a moment in which I realized that what I was good at was not necessarily what I was meant to be doing at that moment. And I also realized that I was doing everybody a disservice by staying there. I wasn't helping myself. I wasn't helping my students. I wasn't helping the school. I really wasn't helping anybody because I wasn't in integrity with myself and with what I needed to be. Have you ever been in a position where you feel that way? Maybe right now you're looking at your life and you're thinking, there has to be more than what I'm living. Or maybe you're looking at your career and you're thinking, when I first started, this was fun or this was challenging, it was exhilarating. It was something that I enjoyed doing. But now you're looking at it and you're thinking, what am I doing here? Am I still serving anybody? Am I doing anything that makes a difference? Or maybe you look at yourself in the mirror and you wonder what happened with the dream and the calling that you had a while ago that you haven't fulfilled. If any of that sounds familiar, today's conversation is going to really inspire you to make some changes and to move towards living an integrated life. Hi, I'm Marcia Amaro, self-leadership coach, speaking and communication expert, and life integration strategist. Now, what does all that mean to you? It means that I can help you, yes, you, the creative, multi-passionate, contribution-driven type, the one that knows that there's more to life than just making a paycheck, and the one that understands that they have a calling in this world that they get to fulfill. I'm here to help you live a life in which all the pieces come together so that you can live out your calling, live with purpose, live with passion, and love every second of your life, your relationships, and your career. Are you ready for more? Then this is for you. So it was my 12th year of teaching, and I started teaching with all these wonderful expectations, with all these dreams, with all this possibility in front of me. And I truly believed that I could make a difference in my students' lives. And for the most part, I think I did. But there came a point where it all came to a halt and I just couldn't see the forest for the trees, so to speak. I couldn't see how what I was doing meant anything to anybody. And I felt really powerless and really useless. I felt pulled in a million different directions. And the worst part is that I had no idea how to get out of that space or how to take strides towards a better life or towards something that meant something to me and to the people around me. And I wish I could tell you that I walked out of that classroom, out of that school, and I went and I found my purpose and my meaning right away. And I went and I created this wonderful, amazing life. No, I actually made a lot of wrong turns along the way. I ended up going back to teaching after about a year or so. I moved to a different town. I did all these other things, thinking that those things would bring meaning into my life until I understood that what was happening was bigger than a disillusionment or a dissatisfaction with my job in itself. I realized that the problem went beyond my work or my career, and it had trickled into every aspect of my life. Because guess what? We are taught that we can compartmentalize or that we can separate our work from our life, right? And that's where the term work-life balance comes in. It's like, okay, let's balance the work and the life, the 2 parts. Or we are taught to think that we are one thing at work, one thing at home, and never the twain shall meet, right? Like, don't make friends at work and don't bring your work home, and separate being a parent from being a spouse, and separate what you do at church from what you do in the rest of the community or when you're partying with friends or whatever. And we are taught to segment ourselves in so many different ways that is why we feel pulled in a million different directions. So today we're going to talk about how to live an integrated life. And in order for us to understand that, the first thing we need to understand is that word integrated, what it means and why it's important. When you look at an integrated life, integrated comes from integrity, right? And usually when we think about integrity, we think about the moral aspect of integrity. So be honest, be of high moral standing, have a good reputation, be loyal, those kinds of things, right? And while that is important and that is an aspect of integrity, integrity in itself is more than just that. When you look up the definition of integrity, there's two definitions. The one that I just mentioned, the one with the moral element to it. But there's also the definition that has to do with structure or physics, for lack of a better term, right? And that definition says that something that has integrity is something that is whole and undivided, right? Whole and undivided. It's still in one piece. When you look, for example, at a building and they look at the structural integrity of the building, a building is in integrity if it is whole, if there's no pieces missing, if nothing is shaking in a way that it shouldn't, if nothing is separating in a way that it shouldn't. In that same way, anything that has integrity, a diamond has integrity when it doesn't have any chips or missing pieces, when it's one whole thing. Make sense? So when we're looking at an integrated life, that is the image that I wanted to have in mind, is that diamond that is whole and therefore has great integrity, is that building that has an integrity in its structure and therefore it's solid, the foundation is strong, right? So when we look at an integrated life, we look at a life that is whole, that is complete, where all the elements and all the pieces fit together in such a way that you have a solid foundation, that you know that it can be rattled and it can be shaken, but it's not going to topple over because it is in integrity. Makes sense? So when we're looking at this idea of living in integrity or living an integrated life, that's what we're looking at, is how can we take all the pieces of who we are, of what makes us whole, and bring them together so that they connect and support each other. It's kind of like the cogs in an engine, right? If they don't collaborate and move each other, if they don't intertwine in a specific way, then the engine doesn't work the way it's supposed to, right? So I have given you a bunch of images because I wanted to really understand and wrap your head around this idea of what an integrated life is, right? So it's everything that makes you you, everything that is important for you to live your life, everything that is required of you in one way or another, all of that works together as one solid unit, as one integrated whole piece. It's not different pieces doing different things in different areas. Make sense? Right? So that is a definition that it's really important to keep in mind as we move forward, because an integrated life is going to look like you understanding that your career and your life get to work in conjunction with each other, that your relationships and your time for yourself, your self-care, get to collaborate with each other, that all of these pieces get to make you the best version of you so that you can go out there and live with passion, live with purpose, and do the things that you need to do without feeling completely burnt out and worn out, without feeling like you're being pulled like a Band-Aid, right? That eventually is going to snap, without you living under this illusion that you can work towards this magical, mystical thing called work-life balance and keep working towards it to the point where it just becomes another thing for you to do, right? So working on trying to have work-life balance, it's like trying to stay on a two-wheeled bicycle without pedaling. It's not going to happen. Sooner or later, you're going to topple over, or you're going to have to balance on one side more than the other, right? And therefore, you're not balancing anymore. So I want you to understand and have in mind, and I would love for you to think about this image of the bicycle as I give this next illustration. So when you think about work-life balance, which is most people's solution to or answer to living an integrated life, they're like, okay, let's find work-life balance. But then here's what happens. Imagine that your right foot is your work and your left foot is your life. What you're trying to do is to keep both those feet in the air, keep the bicycle steady, and not have it topple over. That's not going to happen. When you want a bicycle to be steady, to not topple to one side or the other, what do you have to do? You have to keep pedaling. You have to keep moving. You have to keep doing, right? So you can never reach work-life balance. That's an illusion. You are constantly balancing or attempting that space of balancing. So you're constantly pedaling. You're constantly moving in one direction or the other, right? So when we work through this process and we start talking about living an integrated life, I want you to understand that if your vision, right, of integration, or if your vision of the perfect life up until now has been trying to achieve work-life balance, then you are either tricking yourself into thinking that you're fully balanced, or you're ignoring something that you are unaware of, or you are tipping over to one side or the other without really noticing it, right? It's like when people talk about, and this is the last illustration before we go into how do we do this whole life integration thing, but it's like when people talk about multitasking, right? And there's this illusion that you can multitask. Well, more and more scientists agree that multitasking is an illusion too. You can't really ask your brain to do 2, 3, 4, 5 things at the same time. What you can ask your brain to do is quickly switch from one to the other, right? So instead of multitasking, what you're really doing is rapid switching from one task to the other. And you're doing that so quickly that you trick yourself into believing that you're actually multitasking, when in reality, if you really pay attention, you're doing one thing and then you quickly shift to the other, and then you quickly shift back, which ultimately eats away at your time instead of making you more productive. More and more studies show that if you focus on one thing and you finish that, and then you focus on the next and you finish that, you get more done at the end than if you try to multitask between several things. All right. So that's just a few images to help wrap our heads around this idea of why work-life balance is not real and why integration is the key. All right. So when we're talking about integration, here's what we're talking about. We're talking about the mechanism that moves everything being constantly moved so that the balance is always being achieved, right? But there's something that is being done in the background that is keeping that balance active, all right? So what I'm going to be talking about is a state of presence and of awareness that has to be continually worked on, right? But we're going to think about it in such a way that it's not going to feel like you're constantly working. That's the trick, right? But you're constantly balancing and you're constantly making the mechanism move, right? So when you think again, let's think about the bicycle. It's not just the pedals, it's the pedals and the chain and the cogs that move the chain, and it's the handlebar, right? So there's all these pieces, and then the wheels. There's all these pieces that have to work together in tandem in order for the bicycle to continue moving in what feels like a balanced state, right? So that you don't feel like you're toppling from one side to the other, or so that you don't have to put your right foot down and focus on one thing, or put your left foot down and focus on the other. So that was the right foot is work and the left foot is home, right? So when you're working and both are moving and working together and taking turns, when one is at the top, the other one's at the bottom. When one's at the bottom, the other one's at the top, right? And they're constantly moving and switching, right? That's when you are feeling the balance. But if you stop and you stop the movement, then you will have to lean on one or lean on the other. Am I making sense? So when we're looking at life integration, here's the first element that we need to understand. There are four quadrants to every human being. So the best way I have found to illustrate this is a compass. So think about a compass, right? Normally, I have one here. I don't know if you can see it with my virtual background. I'll try. Okay. So normally, when you look at a compass, you have north, south, east, and west, right? That's normally the way a compass works. But when I am thinking about the compass of life, or the life compass, which is actually what I teach my clients and the people that work with me and in my trainings, when we think about the life compass, the 4 poles become something different. Instead of north, south, east, and west, we're talking about spirit, mind, body, and community. Spirit, mind, body, and community. When you think about the whole of your life, whether you're thinking about your relationships, whether you're thinking about your career, whether you're thinking about your health, your personal development, being a parent, whatever you're thinking about, it can all fit in some place, in some space in that compass, in some place in those quadrants, right? So you have areas that tap into your mind or your spirit, I'm sorry, areas that tap into your spirit, but that also affect your body or that also affect your community. Similarly, in the mind, you have areas that also affect your body and also affect your community. In your body, you cannot really think about your body without thinking, right? So there's all these gray areas in between. But when you fill in the entire compass, you have the bulk of your life represented on there, with these 4 quadrants being the areas that we can work on consistently. So spirit, mind, body, community. Make sense so far? When you look at a compass, the other key element in a compass is the needle, right? And the needle is always pointing north. But there's another end to it, right? And that needle is magnetized. So when you think about your life compass, your needle has 2 things in it, values and focus. So the things that move your needle are your values, which is the part that's always trying to point north, and then your focus, which is what is going to move the needle depending on how far it's moving from north. Am I making sense so far? Yeah. So when you have your 4 quadrants and you have your needle, what you're trying to do is be aware of your values and work on your focus in such a way that you are moving the needle to whatever direction you need to move towards. And we'll talk more about those directions in a minute. All right. So far, so good. So the other element of this, or the other key piece that we get to understand as we move towards an integrated life, is that moving towards something automatically and by definition means that you're moving away from something else, right? I'll say that again. If you're moving towards something, by definition, you're moving away from something else. You cannot go from point A to point B and still stay in point A, right? The closer you get to point B, the farther away you move from point A. Am I making sense? So when you think about your life compass, the closer you move in the direction of whatever, the farther you're moving away from something else. Okay. So generally speaking, when you are in your mind and you're analyzing and you're using your brain and you're trying to think through things, and you're in your career, which is a mind area, right? When you are focused on that, generally speaking, you're moving from something that is more spiritual. So you're probably moving away from your connection with God or your connection with your self-care, or more towards the community / spirit side. You're moving away from your family or away from whatever it is that is important to you in that community and spirit side. So the other part that it's important to know is that it's natural. In the same way that when you're balancing, you cannot keep both feet up or both feet down, right? One has to be up and one has to be down. It's natural and it's to be expected that when you're moving more towards working on a priority that's business related, for example, you're going to find yourself moving a little bit further away from your priorities that are family related or that are self-care related. Does that make sense? So it depends on how your compass is completely built, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But whenever you're moving towards one thing, by definition, you're moving away towards another that is at the other end, right? And that's where the focus piece comes in. So when we understand that by nature, by the way things work, and by just the sheer fact that we're one person, when we're focusing on one thing, we are definitely, by definition and inevitably, going to lose slightly the focus on something else. Then we can be more aware of that dynamic, and we can work towards then setting priorities that allow us to shift the focus to all the important areas in all the quadrants of our life. And therefore, we will never stray so far from any of them that we feel like we're sacrificing or neglecting them, right? There will always be times in our life where our focus gets to be something in particular. For example, I have 2 daughters. They're amazing. They're incredible. I love them to pieces. I am blessed to have the best daughters ever. If you have daughters, I'm sorry, but I have the best. I know you think the same, but anyway, or you feel the same, and you're right, and so am I. But the point is this. I have 2 daughters. When they were babies, when they were just born, I had to allow other things to go in the back burner. I had to allow myself to move away from certain things in order to focus more of my attention, more of my energy, and more of my time to taking care of those babies that were helpless without me. Makes sense? So that was totally acceptable. So at that moment, I was perfectly okay leaning on my left foot, taking my foot off the workpiece, and just focusing on my babies, right? When I started building my business, and still there are certain moments in my business when I'm doing a launch, when I have a new project, when I have something big that's about to happen, then I get to focus more on that. And for a limited period of time, the other areas in my life might be a little bit less tended or cared for, right? And that's okay for a certain amount of time. But there are two things that need to happen during those times. The first one is there needs to be communication with the people in your life that are going to be affected because of that shift in focus. And the second thing is there needs to be a specific date that ends that hyper focus in that particular area. So again, it's okay if for a limited period of time you have to be hyper focused in one area, and you know that that is going to automatically mean that you're slightly going to shift attention away from certain parts of your life. But it's important that you communicate with the people who are going to be affected, right? So when I am in the process of building something big in my business, when there's a launch, when there's a project, there's big momentum, or I'm going to have to travel for work or whatever the case may be, I have a conversation with my husband, with my daughters, with my mom, with anybody in my family and in my immediate circle that is going to be affected by my hyper focus in that area, right? So I make sure that they understand this is what I'm doing, this is why I'm doing it, this is how long it's going to last, and this is when it's going to end, right? And that way they can look forward to the moment when it ends without feeling like they're going to be neglected forever or wondering what on earth is going on, that I'm suddenly ignoring them or not paying as much attention to them as I normally do, right? Similarly, in the other direction, if there is a vacation, a birthday, an anniversary, a special occasion with my family, something that Christmas, something that requires that I shift my focus more to my family than to my business and my work. I let my clients know, I let my team know. We have a conversation. Okay, this is what's happening. This is how it's going to work. This is how everything is going to be taken care of. This is when I'm going to be back, right? And we make sure that the important people in our life understand that this is what's happening. This is why there's going to be this slight shift for a period of time. And this is when it's going to end. So we clearly communicate what's going on and why. Yes. But the other part of that is we make sure that we have a deadline, a limit to when this is going to end, because this is not indefinite and it cannot be indefinite. This is not something that we're going to allow to go on for prolonged periods of time. On the contrary, if it's going to be a healthy process and if it's going to be a process that is going to allow us to live an integrated life, then it has to have a beginning and an end. Right. So if I am, for example, taking a vacation and I am going to not see clients for a little bit, or if I'm going to transfer those clients to another environment or another setting where they're still going to be taken care of, like, for example, maybe for that week, there's an implementation week and I have another person in my team take care of that implementation week or whatever the case may be. Right. But I communicate ahead of time to my clients. Okay, I'm going on vacation with my family. I will be out of commission or not connected on here for a week or two, whatever it might be. But this other person is going to take care of all your needs. You're not going to be alone. You're not going to be abandoned. This is what's going to happen, right? And I'll be back this date. And the first thing we're going to do is this, right? So I make sure that they understand and I communicate with my team. Same thing the other way. You get my drift? So the important thing here is for those moments of, I call them moments of obsession. For those moments of obsession, when you're hyper-focused on one thing over the others, for whatever reason, the key thing is to communicate with the people in your life and to make sure you have a deadline for yourself and for them as to when this hyper-focus is going to end. Make sense? Because otherwise it's going to bleed into everything else. So how do we start living an integrated life? How do we start living an integrated life? Well, the first thing is to fill in your compass. And this is something that I do with my clients more deliberately. And it takes a while to complete your compass, right? So we understand the main poles of the compass. We have spirit, we have mind, we have body, we have community. In between all those poles, like you can have northeast and southwest, and you can have all these points in between, right? And there's degrees in between in the compass if you really look at a fancy one. In that same manner, we have degrees of spirit and community. We have degrees of community and mind. We have degrees of mind and body. We have degrees of body and spirit, right? We have degrees of all these things kind of blending together and operating more towards one than the other. But we have degrees and we have things that fall into all of these things. So the first thing is to understand that you have things all along that quadrant. And for the most part, when you take the time to do this, right, you're going to find that the things that are in opposite sides, whichever direction you look at, are usually things that are in competition, right? So like I said before, your business is probably going to be in competition. Business is over here. It's probably going to be in competition with your family in some way or another. So when you look at those elements, right, and you look at the quadrants, is understanding that you get to set your entire compass in a way that includes every aspect of your life that is important, right? So think about spiritual part. Do you go to church, right? Is your church, your belief system, your faith, is that important, right? So that would be at the top. Then next to that maybe is self-care. Then next to that is maybe confidence. Then next to that, right? So you start filling all those pieces. And then there's your career, and then there's your family, and then there's all these things that fall into the different parts of the compass. And again, this is a longer process that I walk my clients through. But once your compass is complete, here are the two things that all of us can start doing right now. And it boils down to two P's. The first P is setting priorities for each area of your compass, right? So you're going to think about each part that is a part of your compass in some way, right? So when you think about spirituality, what parts fall into that for you? When you think about community, what elements fall into that for you? When you think about your body, and body is not just being fit, right? There's a lot that goes into the body, movement, health. There's a lot that goes into the body. What areas are important to you there? When you think about your mind, what are things that are important there, right? Development, growth, all these things. So when you understand all the areas that are important to you, then you get to set one or two priorities for each one, right? Just one or two. You don't need more, because once you have your compass filled in, everything is going to be taken care of there. Promise. So one or two priorities. So when it comes to family, what is your priority? When it comes to self-care, what is your priority? When it comes to your spiritual being, what is your priority? When it comes to your career, what is your priority? You get my drift, right? So establish one priority for each area of your life. That's the first thing to living an integrated life, right? And the second thing is presence. It's being fully present whenever you're working on that area of priority. So how does the integrated life thing work? How does everything come together? Well, once you have your compass filled out and once you have your priorities for each area, then you start to understand where you're pulled and what you move away from when you're moving towards something, right? So in my case, again, when I'm moving towards business, I'm usually moving away from family. And when I'm moving towards family, I'm usually moving away from business. So what I get to do is set priorities and make sure that anytime I'm working in that priority, I am fully present in whatever I'm doing to work on that priority towards that area, right? Now, I know that because I spent time fully present in this, I have another priority that I get to tend to later. So how do I make sure that all the areas of my life get enough presence from me in order for me to feel integrated? That's what calendaring and scheduling things is for, right? It's not just to have a to-do list that you check off. The first thing that should go on your weekly planning are your priorities for your areas of your life, and you block off time to be fully present in each area of your life. Once that is done, whatever's left that hasn't been taken care of, like that call to the client or that meeting that you get to go to or whatever that is, then that gets scheduled in. But you first focus on the priorities that are important to keeping all the areas of your life satisfied in one way or another. And I know that sounds like a lot, but when you look at how everything comes together, when you fully understand what are all the areas of the compass, I promise you that most of those other things are going to be taken care of by the priorities that you're setting. And it's magical how you see that come together. Anyway, I hope that that made sense and I hope that that was helpful. I am going to be making more podcast episodes centered around the little pieces that fall into place or that come together in order to create this integrated life compass area, and in order for you to start taking the steps towards living this life that it's not balanced, but balancing, and that satisfies all the key areas in your life. In the meantime, if you would like to have a conversation about how do you understand your own compass, how do you start moving towards this integrated life that brings everything together, how do you start creating life, relationships, career that are in keeping with who you really are and that bring all the pieces of your life together, head on over to marciamaro.com, and on there you're going to see a button that allows you to schedule a call with me. Do that, it's free. We will talk about what is important in your life. We will talk about all the quadrants in your life that get to work together in order to create this integrated life, and we will start you on a path towards living a fully passion-filled, meaningful, purposeful, and prosperous life. Until next time, this has been Marcia Ma, and this has been Sincerely Speaking. Share this with someone you love.